a Motorsport Podcast Network production.
G'day Sleuthers, I'm Will Dale and welcome to this week's edition of the V8 Sleuth Podcast powered by the National Motor Racing Museum at Mount Panorama. And as you can probably tell, the boss has let the lunatics run the asylum this week because I'm joined by our resident data guru, Shane Rogers. And Shane, we're going to talk about a topic in Australian touring car racing that's quite dear to both of our hearts. We're talking about the lost enduros, the races that don't quite fall into the Australian Touring Car Championship or Supercars Championship bucket and kind of have been lost to history.
And some of them don't fall into any bucket at all. They don't fall into the on TV bucket or the even reported in the newspaper bucket. So some of them are quite hard to find.
Indeed. And we're doing this because, as we know, the Ryco Enduro Cup is about to get underway for the 2025 Supercars Championship season. We've got the AirTouch 500 at the Bend. That's going to take a bit of time to stick to get that to roll off the tongue nice and smooth. And of course, we've got the Repco Bathurst 1000 on that special Sunday in October. But it feels strange to say it's a recent thing that enduros are part of the championship because it's not now. Like, this is 26 years since they were rolled in 1999.
26 years?
I know, right? 26 years. Well, 26, yeah. 2025 minus 1999. Yeah, I think I've got the maths right.
Yeah.
Please don't at me if I haven't. But this era isn't the first time that enduros were part of the championship. There was a 2-year period in the 70s where all the touring car enduros of the period, all the high-profile ones anyway, were rolled in as part of the championship, and you had this season that started off much like the current one, with sprint races, and then finished off with all these longer distance races, with the exception of Bathurst. And one particular race that actually came up in the Sleuth headquarters recently is the last one of that era, and it's a race that I know you feel particularly passionate about, the 1977 Phillip Island 500.
The Ready Plan 500K, which was the last enduro that was a part of the Australian Touring Car Championship before the enduros came back in 99. And there might have been a good reason for that, because it took them a while to work out the winner. It certainly wasn't the people who watched the broadcast on ATV Channel O in Melbourne, which is now
Channel 10 for all us youngsters.
Yeah,
yes.
Part of Network 10. They left thinking Peter Jansen was the winner of that race, only to find out when they picked up the newspaper the next day that wasn't the case.
Yeah, to be fair, trackside, fans trackside, people at home thought Jansen had won the race because that's what they were told. Alan Grice very much did not think that Peter Jansen had won that race.
No, and look, to my knowledge of looking up that race, and the reason we looked it up actually is to establish the lap leaders, because if you read most of the race reports at the time, from about 1/3 distance, there are varying accounts of the race, and they're very vague. So, when you read a race report these days, it's quite often, Brock Feeney took the lead on lap 37 and he held the lead till lap 62, and then he made a pit stop, and so forth.
Yes.
This was not like that at all. There were some pretty good accounts of the first sort of 9 to 10 laps. And then it was
the easy part of the race before the leaders reach the tail enders, and it all gets a bit confusing.
And then it got a bit fuzzy, and what it led to, and there was a lot of prominent DNFs in that race too, which didn't help. But what, including Brock, but what happened in that race?
That's Peter and Phil Brock.
Yeah,
they were in the one car. No, they were in separate cars for that race.
They were in separate cars, and they both led laps.
Yes.
Depending
on whose account you're listening to.
I on my account, after reading the race reports, I've settled that Phil Brock did lead a lap in that race.
There you go, Phil.
But there were it was a fascinating race with 8 or 9 lap leaders, and a result that, while by modern standards with a 40.9 second margin seems like quite a boring race, was actually completely the opposite. It included Grice only led the last 23 laps of the race, pretty much towards the end of the race. So he actually led the last. Sorry, I'll correct that. He led 24 total, but he only led the last 5 or 6 because Colin Bond had led a significant chunk of laps at the end too. So
Bondi was the only Moffat Ford dealer's representative in that race because Alan himself had already locked up the championship, and after some gnarly experiences at the Phillip Island Enduro in years past, including writing off the 73 Bathurst winner with a horrifying shunt later that year, he didn't really like racing there.
No.
So he didn't.
Well, he drove in the race, but he drove the pace car before the start of the race.
Yes.
And he drove the pace car essentially to appease the promoter who had, promised a Brock Moffat type race, and Moffat wasn't there. So
yes.
I think an arrangement was made. I think is probably how you describe that.
An arrangement was made.
But at the end of the race, essentially what happened is Bond had a lead, and he dropped out.
As happened often in Group C era endurance races.
Yep. And then at that point, it was like, who do we wave the checkered flag at? And in classic endurance racing style at the time, because there was no electronic timing, there was no Dorian transmitters in the car.
It was a bunch of a very, very well organised group of people from, was it the Melbourne Uni Car Club?
It was the Melbourne Uni Car Club, who still time events to this day, and they were scoring the race, as well as all the teams would have their own people who would score the race to keep them in check.
Your Jill Johnsons, your
Christine Grice,
yes,
but also Nigel Greenway was scoring it on the Channel O coverage, and he was of the view all during the event, and you can read about this in the subsequent publications because it went on for quite a few weeks, like into January, and this race was held on the 20th of November, that he was scoring the race differently to how they traditionally scored it at the time in timing and race control. So how they usually do it in timing and race control is they would double check the crossings, and then they would tick off the laps one by one, which
unfortunately meant you had a list of cars that had completed a number of laps, but not in the order that they'd done so.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yeah. Correct. And Greenway would do the scoring that you would see if you loaded a race result on Natsoft these days and you click on the lap chart view. But he would do that by hand with an assistant. But the challenges with that is when you do that and you have to write the numbers in the relevant lap number, you need to look up what lap number the car was on the previous lap to know which column to write in.
Yes.
So it's actually quite difficult to do manually. Like, it's easy when you've got Natsoft and you press a button and it all comes out.
The computer and the timing system does it for you.
Yeah, correct. So this was probably the last really big touring car race that was what I would describe as manually lap scored. We started getting into most races being computer lap scored in the late 70s from that point. And when I say computer lap scored, I don't mean automatically computer lap scored. I mean someone at a keyboard typing a number in and then building the lap chart from that.
And that system, unfortunately, wasn't always accurate, but that is another story for another time.
But at least it allowed you to do things like, for example, if you have a look at a lot of the old Bathurst IBM lap scoring charts, they would have, for each car on their entry list, they would have a notional lap time, which would allow the computer to flag potential errors in data entry, whereas you can't do that with a manual system. So that was the benefit of, like the IBM system, where, if you typed 05 in and the last time you typed 05 was like a minute 20, well, Brock's not doing a minute 20 laps around Mount Panorama. So you can go...
He was good, but he wasn't that good.
I think there's an error there.
Yes.
So, but for this particular race, that wasn't the case. So essentially, with 4 laps to go, they didn't know who the leader was, and their double check tick box lap chart was about 4 laps behind. So by the time they got to the final lap, they couldn't work out who the leader was, and it was either 1 or 2, and they waved the checkered flag at the wrong car, which was Jansen, and Grice was actually a half a lap ahead at that point, and had won the race. They had a very short amount of time to make the decision about who they present the trophy to before the TV coverage ended, and they stuck with Jansen, despite the fact that a lot of people thought Grice was the winner.
Including Grice.
And including Nigel Greenway, who was scoring the race for Channel O. And then later that night, Jansen, I think, considered lodging a protest or lodged a notice of intention to protest. They did the standard audit the night after the event with everyone and pretty quickly worked out that Grice was the winner, and there was no protest, but Grice and Jansen were swapping character references in their respective publications they used to write for like 2 months after, discussing the whole concept. Jansen claiming essentially that he was a noble gentleman and wasn't intending to protest Mr. Grice, and Mr. Grice being adamant that he won the race, essentially. And the irony of it being is Grice wasn't entered for that race. Grice's entry was Jansen's second car.
Yes.
So the story there is Jansen entered 2 cars for that race, one for himself and one for Larry Perkins, and withdrew the Perkins car, which allowed Grice, who didn't have an entry at the time, to enter. So he actually got beat by his own entry.
And that is how number 26 had its only championship race win until David Reynolds took one for Grove Racing a couple of years ago.
Correct.
Yes. Correct. As we said, that was the last time until 1999 that Enduros were part of the championship, but there were plenty throughout that era, and for the next 10 or so years, they actually had their own championship. Before they were rolled into the ATCC, there was the Manufacturers' Championship. It went through a whole different bunch of names. It was known as the Man Champ, known as Championship of Makes. Eventually, it was the Australian Endurance Championship, and it ran from, I think, 1971. It started under series production rules, so separate to the improved production that the Touring Car Championship raced for. Transitioned to Group C in 73 and ran all the way through to 1986. It came back for a couple of years in 90 and 91 before it faded away once again. And eventually, we get to the current era where those races are all part of the championship. But it means that we've got this huge legacy of races that, because they never really kicked on or there's no modern equivalent, they just kind of get forgotten about by history.
Yeah, and I suppose the other aspect of that too is a lot of them didn't have TV coverage,
no.
Whereas the 500, the Sandown 500 or 400, and the Bathurst 1000 did. So therefore, they sort of get lost in the mix because they weren't as prestigious or famous or reported as some of the other races.
No, indeed. There were some very weird and wonderful races throughout that era, and we'll touch on a few of them in this ebb. Not all quite as weird as the 77 Phillip Island 500, but you know what? Some are up there. We're actually going to... The first one we're going to talk about is kind of the spiritual successor of the 77 Phillip Island 500, because after that event, Phillip Island was shut down. It wasn't viable as a race circuit anymore due to the level of degradation of the racing surface and all the challenges that were eventually fixed and returned Phillip Island to one of the jewels in Australian motorsport that it is today. But in 1978, the organising club, PIARC, had a race meeting scheduled, but no actual race meeting, or no actual race circuit, I should say. So they had a plan to run a 500k enduro at Calder. At Calder, before Calder got extended, before the Thunderdome was added, back when it was the 1 mile, 1.61k short circuit.
So this is like 500. How many laps is that?
Well, see, this is the thing. They did have a sensible approach to it. They split it into two 250k races. Yep. So it was known officially as the McEwen Spanners Twin 250s.
So this is that McEwen's the predecessor of Bunnings. So this is like a Bunnings power pass power play.
Yes. So what they did with these Twin 250s, one was for the smaller capacity cars, so anything that was under 3 litres.
Yep.
They had their 250k race on Saturday night under lights, back when Calder did night racing throughout the 70s. So they had, and I think it was run in early December. So it was very much a twilight thing.
Yep.
And then, so they do, I want to say it was 155 laps.
155 laps.
Around Calder. Yep.
Around Calder.
And then Sunday afternoon,
Yep.
The big cars would have their 250, their 250k race.
So when you said it was a twin 250k race,
Literally two 250k races.
Two distinct different races for different cars.
Yes. So kind of like the original Adelaide 500, but if they'd split the field in half on Saturday and Sunday.
Yep.
Now, it wasn't a question of combined results, I don't think, but because both races were over 155 laps.
Yep.
And you know what? Peter Jansen finally got his win.
Finally got his Enduro win.
I think this is actually probably his most prominent touring car race win. Certainly that I've come across. I can't
think of any others.
Yeah. So yeah, he was the winner of the what was ultimately called not a big circuit.
Yep.
How many cars do you think started the over 3 litre race on Sunday?
Well, if they're racing on a bit over a 1 mile circuit, the track density would have been like nice and light. They would have split into 2 races for a reason. Like 20?
Lower?
15?
Lower.
Oh, you're kidding me.
It was 11 that fronted on race day. There were 14 that qualified. 3 cars failed to start and left a stout field of 11. Tiranas and Falcons.
I'm suggesting to you that this race happened before the internet for a reason, because it might have been a rough time on the old Facebook comments if 11 cars started the supercars race at Calder.
So yes. So the top 3 in the big car race was Peter Jansen, Gary Cook, Phil Brock in a Recar Tirana A9X. A9Xs, as they did for most of the other big races of the period, swept the top 5.
Yep.
Other luminaries who didn't quite make the finish, Gary Rogers.
Yep.
He only managed 111 of the 155 laps. So Jack Brabham was right at the pointy end through a chunk of the race, but he fell out in his self-run A9X after 37 laps. And Murray Carter led a big chunk of this race before his Falcon gave up the ghost after 62 laps. And just for the record, the under 3 litre race the previous night had substantially more entries, and that was taken out by Rod Stevens. So Brian Woodford did get a win in the end in their escort from Noel Edwards and Laurie Nelson.
There you go.
There you do go. So the small car field had, by my quick numbers, 18 cars in it.
Yep.
Including retirements.
So was that a part of the Australian Endurance Championship or Championship Makes?
It was, and the Escorts win in the under 3 litre race gave Ford the title, even with Jansen in his Tirana winning the day after.
Because they pretty much got the same points, didn't they? There was almost points by class rather than outright results.
Yeah, it's the intricacies of manufacturers' championship point system is something that I'm very much not attuned to and would probably not make entertaining podcast listening.
No, and it's a reason.
That's
why
one. It's
not in the database for a reason. So,
no.
That's another story.
So another weird one from history is it's another season-ending enduro, but this time it's from 1985. So there were regularly all these circuits that comprised the Australian Endurance Championship. So Calder was a bit of an outlier. I don't think there was another one run there, but you would traditionally have an enduro. Sandown would be part of the championship with the 400, then 500. Then there'd be an enduro at Adelaide, Surfers Paradise as well. Oran Park often would have one as well. Sometimes it was part of the championship, sometimes not.
It was usually early, wasn't it? It was usually before Sandown, and then Surfers Paradise and Oran Park were after Bathurst?
Generally, yeah. So you look at the end of the Group C era, the last Group C Enduro was actually at Surfers Paradise in 84.
Yeah.
But we're looking at the race a year later, which was run, I think, 1 week before the inaugural Australian Formula One Grand Prix at Adelaide.
So that means the teams would have had to have gone from Surfers to Adelaide, and they probably would have needed to be in Adelaide on Wednesday. Okay.
Keeping in mind this is 1985.
Yep. That's a hike.
Yep. So the last thing you'd ever want to do, given that big of a journey, is to tear up your machinery.
Correct.
What happened, Shane?
It was a 14-car pile-up, if I recall correctly.
Yes, yeah. So the race was originally slated for 90 laps, and it was a pretty class field. So you had Jim Richards in a JPS BMW 635, Dick Johnson in his Ford Mustang. He had both Holden dealer team Commodores, Peter Brock in 05, John Harvey and Skippy Parsons in car 7, had Bondi in an Alpha. It was a pretty strong field.
That's as strong as any of the touring car rounds that year. It's not as strong as Bathurst because there were the Jags at Bathurst and a few other bits and pieces, but that's a pretty good field.
Yeah. And 14 laps into the race, there was a pretty sizable rainstorm. And all these cars on slick tyres turned up at turn 1. Oh, worth also noting, earlier in the race, oil had been laid down.
Yes.
So they've all turned up at turn 1 and over, I think, a couple of laps, proceeded to end up in the drainage ditch.
Yes. And
parked nose to tail and side by side.
Now, turn 1 was a very fast corner at the old surface track, wasn't it?
It was.
And we know what surface paradise weather is like in October when the rain decides to come in one big rush in a short period of time. Yeah,
monsoonal, I think. Very, very tropical sort of late afternoon rainstorms.
Yep.
And slight correction, it's actually turn 2, so not as fast as turn 1, but just as car hungry as it turns out. And unfortunately, I don't believe this race was broadcast, and again, this is going to be a theme of several of the races we talk about, but there's all these photos that were published in the period of, I'm counting like 6 or 7 cars nose to tail in the ditch.
Yep.
One of them is Dick Johnson's Mustang, and he is helping Jim Richards extricate the number 1 JPS 635, which is parked in his door next to him.
Yep.
There's other photos of, it must be more than that because the last car that I can see is Charlie O'Brien. Then there's another photo with a Triumph Dolomite, a Mitsubishi Starion, and then Bondi's Alpha, with Bondi looking very forlorn and the Alpha looking even, I'm not sure what the next step beyond forlorn is, but it's looking incredibly sad.
Yeah, it's the number I got was 14. The number I saw reported was 14.
And there were a couple of cars that were already out by that point.
Yep.
I think there were 2
including
cars
Brock.
that did engines. Yeah, and Brock did a timing chain after a handful of laps.
Yep.
Now, it took them a fair while to get all the cars recovered because, of course, with a 14-car pileup, you don't have 14 tow trucks. So it takes a bit of time to get all the cars out. So they eventually completed the race over a much reduced 40-lap distance because sunset was literally on the horizon.
Imminent, yeah.
It was imminent. Several cars didn't make the restart, but not all of them due to damage from the crash.
No. I think at least 5 went home.
Yes, including Brock and Harvey.
Yeah,
they both hopped on a plane back to Melbourne and left Skippy to do the rest of the run in car 7.
Yeah. So Brock had no reason to be there. His car was out of the race. But Harves could have finished the race, and just Brock went, "Oh, I've got a plane to catch. Do you want to be on this plane or not?" And so I assume he was in the Qantas lounge at the airport at the time that all this was all going on.
And fair enough. For the record, Jim Richards, who was part of the crash, won the race from Charlie O'Brien, who was part of the crash. With Dick Johnson in 3rd, who was part of the crash.
Yep.
Terry Finnegan was 4th. I can't remember if he was involved. I suspect not. And same with John Smith in a Toyota Team Australia Corolla, who was 5th. Skippy Parsons ended up finishing 7th behind Gary Wilmington. And I think that, I'm not sure if that race sewed up the Enduro title for Richo, but it certainly didn't hurt.
No. Correct.
Other Enduros from that period, whilst not as weird, often turned up unusual things because it was very much they weren't Bathurst, let's be honest.
Yep.
They weren't the championship either. So it was often a chance for teams and drivers to have a go in cars that maybe weren't the ones that they intended on racing or were looking at maybe racing the following year. The 82 Adelaide Enduro, which was, I think, in, again, the first weekend in December, was one of those weird instances where a driver started the weekend in one car amid rumours he was going to buy another team, and then ended up driving that team's car in the race, even though it wasn't actually at the track at the start of the weekend.
Ah.
So Alan Jones, when he retired from Formula One at the end of 1981, came back to Australia. It's well known that he tried a lot of different Group C touring cars over the course of that year. He ran a Camaro. He got an XE Falcon built by George Shepard that Bob Morris ended up doing the bulk of the races in because AJ didn't like it. He ended up racing a Mazda RX-7. I think he won the Amaru Enduro in it with Barry Jones and then raced it at Bathurst with Barry.
Yep.
But amid all that, like, his plans were very much in flux as to what he was going to do for 1983. So he still had this XE Falcon that didn't make it to the start line at Bathurst because of a wheel failure in final practice that put John Fitzpatrick into the fence, meant he and Bob Morris couldn't take part on race day. Car was all fixed, prepared for the Adelaide Enduro at the end of the year for AJ to drive.
Yep.
Had another wheel failure in practice that badly damaged the car once again. Rendered it unfit for the rest of the weekend. What's an F1 champ to do?
A spare car. No?
Well, it wasn't quite a spare car because Recar Racing, which Alan Grice and Recar owner Alan Brown famously took to second place at Bathurst that year, they weren't actually down to take part in that race because, again, not every team did every race in that era. And Brownie was looking at getting out of touring car racing anyway. So the team was up for sale, and one of the reported potential suitors was Alan Jones. A lot of Allans in this story. So they weren't intending on taking part in that race meeting.
Yep.
But then AJ needed a car. So it was arranged for that car, which was at Recar's base in Melbourne, to be driven overnight to Adelaide. I think it arrived just like maybe less than an hour before the race was due to start. Had a number 7 applied to the door, which was Jonesy's race number. I think it had the wrong diff ratio in it as well initially, and that had to be swapped out. And then off he went, having never driven the car before the opening lap of the race.
Started P25?
Started right down the back. Raced his way forward very quickly, and then I think encountered gearbox problems and didn't end up finishing.
You got 43 laps in.
Yes, which was, given the state of his Falcon, was 43 laps more than he otherwise looked like he was going to get. That race, for the record, was won by Alan Moffat in what the official result sheet referred to as a Mazda RZ7. Not sure if that had 6 gears or a 13B or a turbo. Ahead of Brock in a Commodore and Murray Carter in a Falcon.
Yep.
So, again, that is a race that had no TV. And makes it in this era where a lot of vision resurfaces. We see it in AFL, we see it in rugby league, we see it in motorsport as well. Cricket, absolutely. Of things popping up on YouTube and popping up on social media that have just not been seen for 30, 40, 50 years, and we get to enjoy them and get a snippet of what things were like back then. However, one thing that I don't think we'll ever see broadcast vision of is Peter Brock's only win in a BMW M3.
Ooh.
Yes. That one year that Brock ran BMWs, 1988, he and Jim Richards won the Oran Park Enduro.
They did.
They did.
The Pepsi 250.
The Pepsi 250. They beat the factory Nissan Skyline of George Fury and Mark Scaife, which had led the opening part of the race. However, that race was not televised. So it's almost like it didn't happen.
Yeah. Just imagine if it was televised, because that could have changed the trajectory of where Brock was heading.
I don't know about that, because it was pretty clear that the M3s weren't much chop in that form anymore with how the Ford Sierras had advanced. I think Brock was probably well advanced in his own plans to get himself a Ford.
Yep.
But at the very least, it would have further memorialised what was an unusual period of his career, because of course he'd had the divorce from Holden in 87, continuing to race essentially as a privateer with his HGT Commodores, can't call them Holden dealer team Commodores, throughout 87, and then did the deal with BMW Australia to take over the M3s that had been the JPS BMW weapons of the year before, but that team was shut down due to Frank Gardner's ill health. And in a roundabout's way, this is how Brox ended up racing BMW M3s for a year. And it is funny that particular Oran Park Enduro had no TV coverage, because all the ones for several years prior, back to I think 82, when it was the wonderfully named Perrier Gold Cup. Cool. Real premium sponsorship there. All the way through, you think 1985 when Dick Johnson led the race, but then unfortunately a wheel fell off very late. Would have been his only win in an enduro in a Mustang in that era. That era.
And then there was one more Oran Park 300 that
After
was
88,
on TV.
Yes, so ABC covered the race from, I want to say, at least 82 through to 1987. And then no one did in 88.
Yep.
And then the last Oran Park Enduro, which was a 300k race, which was won by Andrew Miedeke and Andy Bagnall.
There's another Enduro winner that goes unreported.
Yeah, I'm sure Andrew remembers it quite well.
Yeah.
Was it? That was on Sky. That was on Sky.
As in Sky Channel, the horse racing channel.
Yeah.
The channel you watch in the pub.
The channel you watch in the pub. Because
that's what it would have been at the time. It wouldn't have been available on subscription television like it is now.
So so here at V8 Sleuth, we've never seen or heard of any vision existing of that race, but we know that it was televised. So if you happen to have a copy of it somewhere, we would absolutely love to hear about that.
The laws of probability suggest that an 89 race wouldn't be one that was like taped over, like in an archive.
But it would require you to have access to Sky Sports or to Sky Channel. Sky Channel.
Well, they would
wrong channel.
And would they have even kept it? That's the next question.
Well, I just meant as a private person having access and to the channel and a VCR.
You probably had to have owned a pub at the time.
Yeah. So stranger things have happened. It's not impossible. Like Sandown 500 that year was another race that was not broadcast, but vision of that has surfaced. So
I tell you what I do like. I've just looked at result sheets from the 88 and 89 Pepsi 300 races.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a look in the laps column, there is a percentage in front of each car that has done more 100 laps. And the reason that is the lap scoring printout only has 2 spaces for the lap number, and that's actually an error.
What?
So you have a look at, Andy
How are we back in lap chart chat?
No. Andy Miedeke in the Sierra completed 115 laps, but if you have a look at the actual result sheet, there's a percentage in front of the 115, which is actually a system error to say I haven't allowed enough space for the laps column.
Oh dear.
Yeah. That's how rare Enduros were at Oran Park, clearly.
Well, this might be why it was the last one.
Yes.
I see that now.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
The wonders of fully computerized lap timing.
Yes, the good old days where we didn't know the winner for 3 days. How good's car racing in the old days?
One of the other races, and we talk about, you mentioned it off the very top, that there are some race enduros that just didn't fit into any bucket and were completely standalone things. Oran Park had a couple of those in the 70s. It was an event known as the Rothmans 500, ran for a couple of years in 77 and 78. This one had TV coverage. It was shown live on whatever Network 10 was called in that period.
It would have been 10 in Sydney.
Yes.
Yep.
So it was a big dollar race. Like when it was first run in 1977, the total prize money pool, and this won't sound like much now, it was $40,000.
So that was the 12th of June 77?
Yes, smack dab in the middle of the Touring Car Championship. It was a gap. There was gaps around it, but yes.
Adelaide Touring Car Round was the week before.
Oh, it was too. And Lakes, correct me if I'm wrong, but Lakeside was pretty soon afterwards.
Yeah, 2 weeks after.
Yeah, which becomes pretty relevant. We'll explain that in a sec. But it was $40,000. There was a $40,000 prize pool. I think it was about $18,000 that went to the winner. But that 40,000, that was roughly equivalent to what the prize money was to win at Bathurst for the prize pool in that era.
Yep.
So it was worth a bit.
The entry list shows that too. It's a fairly deep entry list.
Oh yeah, everyone and their auntie turned up, and there were some interesting combinations in that Enduro as well. Because if you look at the 77 race, you've got Alan Grice racing his Craven Mile Tirana, but his co-driver is Sir Jack Brabham.
Ah,
yeah, that was a one-off deal. That was a thing that happened.
I can see the Pioneer Electronics Falcon with Ron Dixon and Fred Gibson.
Yes. If you scroll to the bottom of the list, you'll find Dick Johnson and Jim Richards. In the Brian Burt Falcon.
Yep.
Now, this goes back to what I was saying about Lakeside. We were talking about Lakeside being soon afterwards. So that was the original Brian Burt Ford Falcon touring car.
Yep.
That unfortunately Dick crashed literally at the first corner. And this is back when Oran Park, now of course long gone, back when there was a concrete wall that served as the runoff at that first corner.
Yep.
Instead of a big sand trap.
Yep.
Badly damaged the car. But there was only 2 weeks until Brian Burt Ford and Johnson's home race at Lakeside, which they knew they were a fair shot of winning. So as a result, they ended up renting his co-driver Jim Richards' XB Falcon that Richo had been building and had run a couple of times but encountered engine dramas with. But he didn't really have a sponsor, so he wasn't going to do Lakeside. So Dick rented it, Jim made a few quid, and Dick nearly won the Lakeside round.
Yep. One of the other bizarre things about that race, it was rolling start.
Yes, yeah.
And also, when they did the car numbers, they put them in manufacturer order. So
I've wondered about that.
Yeah, so 1 to 7 was all the Ford Falcon GTs, and then all the Tiranas started at like 8.
So that explains why Dick had number 7. Not that he permanently had a lock on 17 in that era.
No.
It was his preferred number. That's why. And why Brock was, 15 or something?
Yeah. Yeah, Brock and Brock in car 15.
Yeah. It doesn't quite have the ring of 05, does it?
No, it just looks odd, yeah. And it just looks unnecessarily OCD, may I say.
There's another detail about that race that I've always enjoyed. 500, that would imply a race distance of 500 Ks or a lap distance of 500 Ks.
Yeah.
In your mind, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I'd feel about it too. That seemed perfectly logical.
Yeah.
Now, the race length in terms of laps was not 500 laps. I don't think doing 500 laps of Oran Park would have been a sensible thing.
No.
It was 222 laps was the scheduled distance.
And the lap distance is?
In that era, it was, 2.6 Ks? Roughly?
So
2.62?
they're a little short.
No, they're not a little short.
Oh.
2.62 times 222. I can hear you tapping
Oh,
away.
no, they're over.
They are way over.
581.6.
Yeah, the race distance was almost 600 Ks for a Rothmans 500.
Well, that's the opposite of time certain.
It is. I'm not sure how much of the broadcast got in on Channel 10. Again, if anyone happens to have a Betamax or whatever U-matic copy of that race lurking in their garage,
I'll copy it off anything.
Yes, yeah, we would absolutely love to hear it. The first one was that 222 laps in that era in a Group C car was a massive grind around Oran Park, and I think it was the Privateers that won it that first year.
Cullen and Sampson won.
Yeah,
and the race time was, and they won by lap. The race time was 5 hours 23 minutes.
Oof. The following year, it was the Holden dealer team that won it, but it wasn't Brock and Richards in car 05, which broke early, but it was John Harvey and Charlie O'Brien in the 76 car, despite running out of fuel around the back of the circuit halfway through the race, and Harves walking back to the pits for a jerry can.
Oh, what?
Walking back to the car, topping it off, and driving back to the pits, and losing all that time, and still coming through to win the race.
That's impressive.
Yeah, it's again, all these weird and wonderful things that happened at very, very prominent touring car races of the era that just get skimmed over by history because they weren't a championship round.
Yep.
Then we talk about an enduro around Oran Park being a grind. Well, that other long lost, much loved Sydney circuit, Amaroo Park, it also hosted touring car enduros throughout that 1980s period. You think back to when Dick Johnson, probably his first high-profile run in True Blue, the XD.
Yep.
CRC 300 Amaru Park Enduro 1980, where he gave Brocky in the Marlboro Holden dealer team Commodore a run for his money. And then, of course, we all know what unfolded at Bathurst a few weeks later.
Yep.
Well, that was a 300-kilometre enduro around Amaru Park, which was, 1.93 Ks?
Yeah.
So it was like 150-something laps.
155.
Yeah. And that turned out a few... I don't know whether interesting races is the right word, but it definitely turned up a few varied results. You had, as mentioned before, Alan Jones and Barry Jones, unrelated. Barry Jones being the Sydney-based rotary guru and ace car preparer who passed away a few years ago now. They won the 82 race in an RX-7.
Yep.
You had... You might have to fact check me on this, but I feel like Nissan won it a year later.
Oh, in
83.
3?
You had and then 80 and 81 were won by the Holden dealer team, Brock and Harvey, and I think maybe Brock and Perkins. Brock and Perkins definitely had a run in the enduro, one of these enduros, across the Group C era. The race actually served. It never fell into the bucket of endurance championship races, but it did take part in
Celestic 300. Yeah, George Fury and the Nissan won it in 83.
There you go.
Yep.
That was generally part of the AMSCAR series, the sort of in-house Amaru touring car series that was always broadcast on Channel 7. So all these races were shown live on TV.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about we're looking at the 1980 race.
Yes.
And if you have a look at the grid sheet for that race,
Mm.
you'll see 21 on the very back of the grid sheet, 25th position on the grid, looks like it's written with a slightly dimmer coloured pen because they qualified 24 on qualifying speeds and then had a quali race for all the cars that DNQ'd, and the winner of the race got into the main 300.
Never try and tell us we're not thorough here at V8 Sleuth.
That's bizarre. There you go.
Yeah, qualifying races.
Yeah.
What a thing.
Yeah, so just imagine having an enduro and saying, okay, we're going to have the enduro here. It's 500 Ks at the bend. We're going to allow, how many starting at the bend? 27 this year?
I think, yeah, with wildcards.
No, we've randomly decided only 26 will start. We're going to let 20 through and then have a race for the last,
For the sheep stations at the back of the grid.
Yeah, like a petty action dash to get on the last spot on the grid. That'd be great.
I'd say it would never happen, but of course we have had qualifying races at 500k enduros in the recent past
that have decided the grid.
But not this year in the new iteration, the AirTouch 500 at the bend. Got to get my practice in saying it.
AirTouch 500 at the bend.
AirTouch 500 at the bend.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. For the Ryco Enduro Cup.
The Ryco Enduro Cup. What do you think of no qualifying race at the bend? Or no qualifying races?
It's complicated this time around. See, I'm a big fan of the qualifying races. I always love them as something to do on the Saturday something to pay attention to on the Saturday of the race meeting, and also gives more weight to the co-driver earning their pay, because they actually had a sprint race where
their performance solely decided the outcome.
Very much mattered. And there's a lot of co-drivers from that era that have championship pole positions, Luke Yulden being one of them, because of their performances in those sprint races. And obviously they contributed to the pole as well. So they get the award.
Yep.
Just to round off that Amaru Enduro, they eventually dialed it back to a 100-lap race. And I think the last one was run in 1987, where I think Tony Longhurst started the race in 1M3, got out of it, and then took over Jim Richards' car for the last couple of laps and was therefore first and, I want to say third, or wherever the other car finished.
Yeah, this is cross-entered double finish.
The good old days of cross-entering.
Yeah, and that would happen because you would jump out of the car because it couldn't win, but if you were like 5 laps down, you could easily finish in the top 5 in all of these races.
Oh, for sure.
Easily.
And by that point of that particular race, Richo was long gone. I mean, their main opposition was, I think, Bondi in the Alpha, might have been in the Alpha 75 Turbo, I should say, was on pole and wasn't as much of a stayer as the M3, let's say. And then I think there was another decent accident if you've seen vision of Trevor Ashby and Steve Reed's Lansvale Commodore being crashing into the Peter Jackson Nissan Gazelle that was raced by Terry Shield and Mark Scaife at Dunlop Loop.
Yep.
That's from this race. So, and it and as you can tell by the fact that the Gazelle had been there for most of a lap and then got hit by cars that were coming across the yellow flag for the first time, no safety cars.
Predate safety cars.
Yes. You could say a lot of things about Amaru holding an Enduro at Amaru that predates safety. Well, I think Ron Dixon got black flagged for exiting the pits too enthusiastically. Let's say.
Yeah. I mean, people think that pit lane speeding and all that sort of stuff, it's all new, but the reality is it's just enforced better and more consistently than it was in the 80s, especially when it started to become a thing.
Well, I actually had solid rules around what you could and couldn't do.
Yeah,
in part because of what Moffat did at the 82 Castrol 400, where he rammed home the point that the pit lane should be considered part of the racetrack.
Yes, by driving through it at high speed multiple times.
Which unfortunately led to one of the recar mechanics getting hurt. But Moffat got the race win in the end amid great controversy and another long protracted series of appeals and protests, which again is for another podcast.
Read next month, or even perhaps the month after's auto action to find out what happened in that one.
No, it was really something. As it was said earlier, the Australian Endurance Championship wrapped up in 86. A bunch of different Enduros, including that 88 Oran Park Enduro, took place as basically standalone races for the next couple of years. But CAMS brought the Australian Endurance Championship back for 1990 and 91. And this is where the last proper standalone, I guess, main game, for want of a better term, touring car Enduro took place outside of Sandown and Bathurst, and doesn't really have a legacy in the modern era. It's the 1990 Sydney 500, which was the inaugural touring car race meeting, inaugural four-wheel race meeting at what is now known as Sydney Motorsport Park.
Yeah, so that's that race was a Channel 9 race.
Correct. It was a Saturday afternoon race, so it could get onto Wide World of Sports.
So did they cut in and out of that, or did they cover that race in full?
Pretty much in full, I believe. I don't even know if they had the in-race sports updates from the Bear.
Yeah, that'd be
from Ian Reese.
Yeah. Or horse racing, where they used to cut into the...
Oh, I reckon they did have the horse racing.
Oh, so yeah, they've
Ken Callender, yeah.
Yeah, so they've jumped out of the race because Silver Stallion's running at Randwick or something similar?
Something like that, yes. Commentary on that race was Big Darrell Eastlake, and he was joined by none other than Murray Walker with Win Percy as the
flew
doing the expert
because that was
comments.
January?
No, it was a week after it was 6 days after the Australian Grand Prix in Adelaide.
So
Murray stuck
therefore
around.
Murray was in town. Yeah.
He actually went for a hot lap with Dick Johnson in the lead up to the race, and was very, very impressed at the speed of the Ford Sierra Cosworth. And that car played a pretty big role in the race on Saturday, where it was largely between Larry Perkins, Thomas Mezzera in the number 11 Perkins Engineering Commodore.
Yep.
And the number 17 Shell Ultra High Ford Sierra of Dick Johnson, John Bower, because the Nissan GTR that had started on pole with Jim Richards and a very sheepish Mark Scaife having written off a GTR at Adelaide the week before,
yep.
That car checked out into the distance and then lost a wheel. And so that... It didn't ruin their race because if you believe what Scafey told the TV broadcast, they were always planning on a 2.5 stop strategy, and the lost wheel, which happened on the entry to the pits, meant they just got their half stop out of the way early.
Yeah.
But by the time Richo came in for the first main stop, the thing was overheating, and she was done.
51 of 125 laps.
Yes. Worth noting also that Neil Crompton qualified to drive that car in the race in case Scaife, who'd, of course, rolled the GTR at Adelaide the week before, was unfit, but in the end he wasn't required. It also was not the only car Crompton qualified to drive in that race, because Andrew Miedeke had, I think, an ear infection or some sort of virus that had him laid low. So he hopped in and turned qualifying laps in Peter Brock's 05 Sierra.
Oh, as a backup co-driver.
As a backup driver across 2 different cars, for which neither of which he was entered for, which apparently earned him a trip up to Tim Schenken to explain what on earth he was doing.
Not Crompton's first.
No, not his first, not his last. And in the end, he didn't get a Guernsey on race day anyway. Because both Scafey and Miedeke were fit to drive.
Copped all the trouble for no race.
Yeah. And of course, Larry and Mezzera famously went on to win that race. Even before the number 17 Sierra blew up with 2 laps to go, they had I think a 2 or 3 second margin over JB. And yeah, that was the last
6 Sierras in the top 7.
Yes, and none of them in the top spot.
Yep.
And that race was the last round of the Australian Endurance Championship that year, which comprised of Sandown, Bathurst and Eastern Creek.
Yep.
And that was won by Glenn Seaton, who'd won the Sandown Enduro, performed well enough at Bathurst, and then came home second with Colin Bond, making a cameo in a GSR Sierra to sew up the title. The championship was back again in 91, but with the downturn in the economy, I mean, they were struggling to put a field together for Bathurst, for goodness sake. I think something like only 10 or 11 cars turned up for Sandown, and Sandown and Bathurst were the only 2 legs of the championship that year.
Yeah, 99 Sandown had 6 classified finishes in the end.
Yes, and you can see why John Davison, the promoter of Sandown Park, elected to include production cars in subsequent Sandown 500 Enduros.
Well, they're going to do that for Bathurst too, as we've discovered recently.
Yes, they were. And yeah, that plan was eventually seen off by teams saying, "No, don't worry about it. We'll get together a field," and yeah, they did. To their credit, like there were 3 DJR Sierras, there were 3 Brock/Perkins engineering entered cars, and yeah, they eventually got it together and had a field of 40 something. So, to their credit, and it's handy that we've sort of circled back to Bathurst, because although that 1990 Sydney 500 was the last real standalone main game Enduro, again, for want of a better word. I use main game advisedly, though, because the last non-point standalone Enduro in, I guess, Supercars history was the 250k Super 2 race at Bathurst in 2017.
Oh, the Macca Jones one.
The Macca Jones one, where that was Macaulay Jones' only Super 2 win, and it just so happened that it was a non-points race.
Yeah. Just Macca's luck, too.
Just Macca's luck. But that was, for what I can't remember the ins and outs of it, because they had been doing a 250k Enduro, mini Enduro, as the Bathurst round for a couple of years prior to that. But that particular one, I think it was to try and encourage different drivers or more cars, or
I think it was something to do with not having a big race before Bathurst deciding the Super 2 championship as well.
I can see the logic in that.
Yeah. There was a bit of everything in that one.
Well, we've kind of only really... This is really just scratching the surface of this rich vein of wild touring car Enduros that have just fallen through the cracks of history.
Well, yeah, I mean, like even stuff like 69 and 70 Service Paradise 12 Hour.
Yeah, which were, again, not part of a championship, but just standalone series production races.
Same cars that ran at Bathurst.
They were. Maybe one day we'll come back and start and cover off a few more of those races. But I reckon that'll do us for now. What do you think, Shane?
Sounds good.
Thanks again for joining us for this week's edition of the V8 Sleuth Podcast, powered by the National Motor Racing Museum at Bathurst. Chat to you next week, where normal service will be resumed and it'll be the boss back behind the mic, and I think he'll have a special guest.